Welcome back. You're watching The Globe here on SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. I am Tsepiso Makwitla. Singer Somi Kakoma is set to launch her album Zenzile, the Reimagination of Miriam Makeba. This Sunday, the American-born singer, who uses her first name Somi as her stage moniker, says the album launch will honor the late music legend and celebrate her memories. Somi landed in South Africa on Wednesday to prepare for the show. She's promised music lovers a great time as she shares the stage with local stars. And to talk more about this, we're joined none other by the Grammy nominee Somi. A very warm welcome to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. What a treat, I must say. Please mute yourself, Somi. There we are.
I am unmuted.
Yes, okay, now we can hear you. Awesome. So welcome home. Thank you so much for joining us, and talk to us. Are you excited about your performance tomorrow?
First of all, thank you. I don't know if you heard. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Firstly, I'm so thrilled to be back in South Africa, and I'm looking forward to sharing this music with the South African audience. I've released an album called Zenzile, the Reimagination of Miriam Makeba, and obviously I'm thrilled to be able to bring it home to South Africa, to the place that actually gave us Mama Miriam. So I'll be at the State Theater tomorrow evening with some incredible musicians and dear friends, trying to honor her as best as I can.
And tell us a little bit more about whom you'll be performing with and why. I understand that Thandiswa Mazwai is going to be there, and she performed with you at the Apollo Theatre as well.
Yes, so some of the guests for tomorrow are people who appeared on the album itself. So that includes Thandiswa Mazwai, as you mentioned, also Musaki, also Nduduzo Makatini. All three of them were on my album as some of the special guests from South Africa who appear on the recording. And I invited Musaki and Thandiswa to New York this past week. Actually, literally 1 week ago, we were the album release celebration in New York was at the Apollo Theater, and I also had invited Diane Reeves to participate on that night. So it was really a magical, I would say, historic night, definitely a milestone in my career. And it's just wonderful to be able to bring the energy of that show and the love, that's the palpable love for Mama Miriam that we felt in the room, obviously back home to South Africa. So tomorrow night we'll be with Nduduzo and Musaki and Thandiswa, as well as Zoe Modicha and the legendary Hot Stick, Sankosipo Mavuse. So we're looking forward to that.
I want to talk about the Apollo Theatre performance there. It has some historical importance, and the day on which you chose to do it as well. Tell us a little bit more about the background to that performance and how it was received. I believe you had some fellow musicians much loved and celebrated here in South Africa as well, like Diane Reeves, Gregory Porter. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, the album came out on March 4th, which was Mama Miriam's would have been her 90th birthday. So it was important to me to launch this project on her birthday as we honor her and remember her on her 90th birthday, also being Women's Month, also being Human Rights Month here in South Africa. The weekend that we chose was also the weekend of Human Rights Day here in South Africa. So the Apollo Theatre, they've been just supporters of mine through the journey of not only this album, but also a play that I've written, a musical honoring Mama Miriam called Dreaming Zenzile, that is opening off Broadway in New York in the spring, in 2 months actually. So we really, I was so excited to be able to play at the Apollo, obviously for all of the history there. Mama Miriam being the first African woman to show up on the global cultural stage and to make room for all of us. I was reflecting on a passage I read in her autobiography where she talked about what it was, I believe, September of 1961, I believe, is when she made her debut at the legendary Apollo Theater on that stage. So it was just so special to be able to be in Harlem, be on that stage, not only thinking about her, but just what her legacy means for the conversation between Africa and the Americas, what her music and her life's work really did speak to, not only in South Africa, but across the world. So it was just such a gift to be able to do that, and obviously to share in that historic occasion with Kandiswa and Musaki and Mama Diane as well.
Mm-hmm. And just your relationship with Mama Miriam, her music. I understand that you say you'd been having conversations with Prahu about a project to celebrate her legacy, to bring to the fore all of these qualities that you say, her ability to bring across at least transatlantically the struggles of the black people on the continent and abroad.
Yes, Brahim Sekela was a dear, dear friend, probably my greatest mentor, I would say. And so I, of course, came to him when I first began to think about this project 7 years ago. And of course, he was like, "Are you sure you can sing some of this music? Are you sure you can?" He always would ask the difficult questions, which I loved about him. I wish that he was here to see the work as it's continued to grow and shift. But he definitely gave me a lot of insight at the early stages of this project about her life, about the music. I mean, in fact, the song "Love Tastes Like Strawberries" that appears on the album with featuring Gregory Porter is one of the songs that he actually asked me to perform. He said, "Oh, you should know this song by Mama Miriam. It would sit well in your voice," he thought. So I'm grateful for his guidance, and and I would like to believe that he'd be proud of what the project has evolved into at this point.
Okay. Now, I'd like to talk about Zenzile, the album. I believe that you say it's a companion piece to a larger cultural memory of work. Tell us a little bit more about this, and what exactly does it mean? We'll talk a little bit more about some of the other work that you've done and what's inspired it, but I'm just curious about this, even the name Zenzile, where it comes from, etc.
Sure. Well, Zenzile is her first name. It was her first given name. Miriam was her middle name. And so when I first learned about her first name, the meaning of it, Zenzile, this idea of you have done it to yourself, I was quite moved by the idea of agency that we have in our lives, the agency she had in her own life, the agency she inspires in all of us, in the way that we live, in the way that we love, in the ways that we sacrifice throughout our life. So that's really how it started, really as a meditation on the gift, the burdens and the freedoms that accompany the gift of song, both not only in music but also in this piece. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to reflect on that through this work. And I would also say, in terms of the play, Dreaming Zenzile, the more I began to look at her 50 to 60 year catalog of work and music, the more I realized I needed to understand sort of the social and political and cultural and personal context around her music. I'm always interested in what an artist was going through when they were making the work, right? And so the more I learned about her life, the more I realized I didn't know about her life, despite the fact that I've been a lifelong admirer of her work. And I just thought, well, why aren't we celebrating her more? Why don't we see, so much more about Mama Miriam? And there are all kinds of reasons for that. I would say that the initial, at least in the United States, the initial reason is this sort of sustained cultural erasure that happened when she married Stokely Carmichael in the 1960s, who was at the time the head of the Black Panther Party. And I just think it was an efficient kind of erasure, that compromised, at the height of her celebrity, that compromised some of her visibility. Obviously, she was culturally exiled from the U.S. in the 60s, and so it wasn't until the 80s she sort of came back into the public consciousness of the American audience, which is obviously very different from the African audiences and European audiences she went on to perform for. But I think for me, this project, both the album and the play is more of like, revisiting her life journey, where I'm trying to embody her life story, whereas the album is me as a vocalist honoring her as a vocalist and all that she's given me and inspired in my own work. And so, yeah, it's really just a cultural memory project, and I'm hoping that what it does is just invites people to consider all the ways that she's inspired them as well.
So focusing on the cultural and the political, your biography says some musicians benefit from a deep connection with the place and traditions into which they're born. Others find who they are on extended journeys, connecting with sounds that are foreign yet inherently familiar. Now, this struck me when I thought about your work on the song Holy Room. I mean, that is such a layered project. I find it quite profound, and I want you to talk to us about it, how you were able to turn words which have been weaponized, which essentially in their original states supposed to be a positive message, but has been turned into an instrument of war.
Well, are you talking about Allahu Akbar?
Yes.
That the phrase in the chorus of the song? Yeah, I think for me, I wrote that song really, Holy Room, I wrote it at a time, it's a part of my previous studio album, which is called Petite Afrique, and really looks at the dignity of African immigrants living in Harlem, which is the neighborhood I've lived in for almost 20 years. And there's a long-standing, African community in Harlem, predominantly West African, predominantly Francophone, predominantly Muslim. And, when I was writing, I wrote that song at the height of this sort of Islamophobia that showed up with Donald Trump's announcement to be a presidential candidate in the United States. And I'm not a Muslim woman, but I was so enraged by the kind of the vitriol and the negative rhetoric that was being directed at our Muslim brothers and sisters. And so I thought, what better way to disarm hearts and invite a conversation of understanding than through a love song, And I think what I'm trying to do by making the chorus Allahu Akbar, which actually really means God is great, to place it there, it actually would ask the listener to question what it means, because in the US or in a lot of places, people started associating that phrase with terror, even though it was just a tiny, tiny, tiny minority, a tiny percentage of peace-loving Muslim brothers and sisters across the planet who, that phrase really is about their own faith. So that's what Holy Room is about, and that's why I wrote it, really just to honor them and to invite people to reconsider the narratives that were being pushed out around Muslim people in the world and continue to be.
The Secretary General of the UN, then Ban Ki-moon, asked you to perform at the General Assembly in commemoration of the International Day of Remembrance of Victims of Slavery and Transatlantic Slave Trade. Tell me about that moment, what it meant for you, and how it has influenced your work going further.
I mean, I think that when to have that kind of opportunity to reflect on the slave trade, I think as an African woman, I think oftentimes as Africans, we don't own the legacy of slavery in the way that we should. And I don't think we think about the Black people in the world as necessarily the diaspora. We don't always own that community. I think there is like a shared kind of understanding Black consciousness at times, but I think that there is a necessity to not only understand the implications of some of the Africans who were a part of that business in the industry of slave trade, but also just to acknowledge the horror of it. And so I was deeply honored to be able to acknowledge that trauma on behalf of not only the folks in the diaspora, but the continent and the daughters and sons of the continent in general. So I was very humbled by that moment and encouraged by it, encouraged that an organization like the United Nations would take the time to acknowledge that trauma and that history.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. Really, really appreciate it, and all the best for your performance tomorrow. I'm sure a lot of people are looking forward to the play. So if you haven't bought your tickets yet, it's at the State Theatre, the launch here in South Africa of Somi's new album, The Reimagination of Miriam Makeba, Zenzile. Thank you so much, Somi, and all the best. All right, so that's singer-songwriter, Grammy nominee Somi.